At 1:47 in the morning on February 1st, 2026, a device the size of a small matchbox implanted in Nancy Guthrie's chest recorded something that investigators say they have never seen in a case like this. Her heart rate spiked. Not gradually, the way a heart responds to a bad dream or a sudden noise. Sharply. The kind of spike that forensic cardiologists associate with one specific thing, a conscious person who has just come face to face with something that terrifies them. Nancy was not asleep. She was awake, and her body recorded what happened next, every single second of it, in a device that is still running right now. That detail alone changes how you understand everything else about this case. And that is where we need to start. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She lives in the Catalina foothills neighborhood of Tucson, Arizona, in a home she has kept for years in a quiet, well-established part of the city where the streets go dark early and the neighbors are not close enough to hear much of anything past midnight. She is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, the anchor of NBC's Today Show, a woman whose face millions of Americans wake up to every morning. Nancy raised her family in the kind of life that looks ordinary from the outside. Dinners at home, grandchildren coming and going, a front gate that family members had walked through hundreds of times over the years. She is also a woman with a pacemaker, a woman who requires daily medication for conditions that become life-threatening without it. A woman who, according to Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos, is of great sound mind. He said that specifically in public because he needed people to understand Nancy Guthrie did not wander away. She was not confused. She did not leave on her own. She was taken. On the morning of February 1st, when Nancy did not answer her phone and could not be reached, her family contacted law enforcement. What investigators found when they arrived at her home was not the scene of a random break-in. There were signs of a planned, deliberate operation, one that had been thought through carefully and executed in a window of time when the neighborhood was as quiet as it was ever going to be. The FBI was called in, and within days, they released something that most people watched once and moved on from: 44 seconds of doorbell camera footage from Nancy Guthrie's front porch. Here is the thing about that footage that most coverage got wrong. Those cameras should not have captured anything at all. Nancy's Nest camera system did not have an active cloud subscription at the time she was taken. The cameras were installed and powered on. They could detect motion. They could send an alert to a phone. But they were not storing continuous footage to the cloud. There was no recording to pull the next morning. Whoever planned this operation, and investigators believe it was planned in detail, apparently knew that. They approached that porch as if the cameras were not a concern, because as far as they knew, they were not. The FBI had to go directly to Google and ask engineers to dig into back-end servers for residual data that had not yet been fully overwritten, data that was, in technical terms, already in the process of disappearing. They got 44 seconds back, and inside those 44 seconds, they found enough to build a physical profile. Reverse infrared technology was applied to the footage. That process amplifies heat signatures and light differentials to pull out details invisible to the naked eye in standard video. What came out of that analysis was specific. The FBI released an official physical description on February 12, 2026. Male, 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10, average build. And then this: a black mustache and goatee visible through the openings in the ski mask the figure was wearing. Stop there for a moment. The suspect kept that mask on the entire time he was on that porch, and yet the FBI was still able to describe his facial hair because the mask had eye holes and a mouth opening, and through those openings, under infrared enhancement, the dark hair of a mustache and a goatee was visible. That is not a vague description. That is a specific physical characteristic attached to a specific height and build. Former FBI profiler Jim Clemente reviewed the footage publicly and identified what he believed to be a distinctive marking on the suspect's right wrist, visible in frames where the glove had ridden up slightly during movement. So hold those 4 points: 5'9" to 5'10", average build, black mustache and goatee, distinctive marking on the right wrist. Now, when former FBI profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole looked at how this figure moved across Nancy Guthrie's porch, she did not describe someone nervous or erratic. She used a specific word: comfortable. He moved around that porch slowly. He did not scan for the camera. He walked directly to it without searching. He reached into the potted plant beside the front door and covered the lens with foliage without hesitating, without feeling around for the plant. He went straight to it. O'Toole said that level of comfort can come from personality, but it can also come from something else entirely, from a person who already knew the layout, who knew where the plant was, who had been briefed on every detail of that property by someone who had walked it many times before. The question investigators were sitting with was this: who could have known all of that? Who knew the cameras were not recording? Who knew which plant sat next to the front door? Who knew the layout of the house well enough to move through it in the dark? The answer to that question leads to a name, and that name connects to a relationship that has been sitting in plain sight for 19 years. We are going to get to that, but first, there is something that happened 9 days before Nancy Guthrie was taken that most people covering this case have not fully explained. Something that changes how you understand everything that happened on February 1st. 9 days before Nancy Guthrie was taken, on January 23, 2026, a man was captured on a Ring camera approximately 6.5 miles from her home. He was walking backward. That is not a typo. He was moving down a residential street in the dark, deliberately facing away from the direction he was traveling, and he kept doing it even after a dog in a nearby yard started barking and he broke into a run. Most people, when they hear a sudden noise in the dark, spin toward it. That is not a choice. It is biology. This man suppressed that reflex completely. He ran backward. He would rather risk falling on a sidewalk than give that camera a single frame of his face. Consumer security cameras like Ring use passive infrared sensors that go into a low power state until they detect body heat moving through their field. When the sensor wakes up, there is a gap, 1 to 2 seconds before the lens adjusts and the connection establishes. Walk toward a camera, and those first seconds capture your face as you approach. Walk backward, and by the time the camera is actually recording, all it captures is the back of your head. This man had studied how these specific cameras work. He had learned about the sensor lag, and he was using that knowledge in real time, on a dark street, 9 days before Nancy Guthrie was taken. And when investigators compared what that Ring camera captured on January 23rd to the doorbell footage from Nancy's porch on February 1st, the same Ozark Trail backpack, the same reflective safety strips, the same height, the same build, January 23rd was not a coincidence. It was a dry run. He was testing whether the camera would capture anything worth worrying about. When law enforcement did not knock on his door the next morning, he had his answer. He was invisible. By February 1st, he was not testing anymore. Now here is where the name comes in. Dominic Aaron Evans is 48 years old. He lives in the Tucson area. He works as an elementary school teacher. And since 2007, he has been the drummer in a band called Early Black. The bassist in that band is a man named Tommaso Cioni. Tommaso Cioni is the husband of Annie Guthrie. Annie is Nancy Guthrie's eldest daughter. That makes Tommaso Cioni Nancy Guthrie's son-in-law. And that makes Dominic Evans the 19-year musical partner of the last known person to see Nancy Guthrie alive. Go back to those 4 data points the FBI released: 5'9" to 5'10", average build, black mustache and goatee, distinctive marking on the right wrist. Multiple publicly available photographs and performance videos show Dominic Evans at approximately 5'9", average build, with a black mustache and goatee. In performance footage from Early Black available online, a marking is visible on Evans's right wrist. Former FBI profiler Jim Clemente said the marking he observed in the doorbell footage was consistent with what independent researchers identified on Evans's wrist in that same band footage. Not one match. Not two. Every single data point in the FBI's official physical description maps onto Dominic Aaron Evans. But the detail investigators found next, this is what changed everything. The Pima County Judicial Database is publicly accessible. Under the name Dominic Evans, there are documented felony entries: burglary, robbery, theft, embezzlement, DUI. Under Arizona law, burglary is unlawful entry into a structure with the intent to commit a crime inside. Robbery is taking property from a person through force or the direct threat of force. Read that slowly. Unlawful entry into a structure, confrontation of a person, taking property from them by force. Then read the description of what happened inside Nancy Guthrie's home at 1:47 in the morning. Someone entered that home unlawfully. Someone confronted an 84-year-old woman. Someone took her by force. The documented criminal history that matches what was done to Nancy Guthrie exists in public court records under the name of the man whose physical description matches every point of the FBI's official profile. And yet, neither of the two DNA profiles recovered from this crime scene matched a single profile in the FBI's CODIS database. CODIS contains 19 million known offender profiles. For a person with documented felony convictions, that absence has a specific legal explanation. Arizona's DNA collection laws have been amended multiple times over the years. If Evans's convictions were entered before the state implemented mandatory DNA collection for his specific categories of offense, or if any of his cases were resolved through plea agreements that did not trigger automatic DNA submission, he could have multiple felony entries in the county system and remain completely invisible to the federal database. Documented on paper in Tucson, a ghost in Washington. Evans spoke to the New York Times in February of 2026. He said he had met Nancy Guthrie exactly once, at a family Easter egg hunt in 2011, 15 years before she was taken. He said he found out about her disappearance through Instagram. Not from the television, where her daughter Savannah was at the center of the story on every major network simultaneously. Not from Tommaso calling him. Instagram. And his first move after finding out was not to call Tommaso or text him. It was to send a private direct message. During an active federal investigation in which law enforcement was monitoring every form of communication in and out of that household, his instinct was to reach out through the most private, least traceable channel available to him. Investigators who examined the metadata of that communication, the timing, the pattern of messages between Evans and Chioni in the weeks before February 1st, the frequency of contact and the sudden shift after, would not read that private message as a gesture of support. Now consider the ransom demand: $6 million in Bitcoin. Not $5 million, not $10 million, not a round number chosen by someone guessing at television wealth. $6 million. That is a precise figure, a surgical figure, a figure that reflects specific knowledge of what Savannah Guthrie actually earns, what she could realistically access in liquid assets quickly, and the difference between her public profile and her real financial reach. A complete stranger demands $50 million because strangers think in large round numbers. Someone who has spent 19 years adjacent to that family's conversations lands on $6 million because they know what is actually reachable. There is one more thing about this case that has not been properly addressed anywhere, and it involves what Nancy's own body recorded in the final minutes before all contact was lost. At approximately 2 hours and 41 minutes into the window investigators were tracking that morning, the data from Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker changed in a way that stopped forensic cardiologists in their tracks. The movement pattern recorded by the device shifted. Not Nancy walking. Not Nancy moving through rooms under her own effort. The accelerometer data showed passive transport, the specific signature of a person being carried by someone else. And the character of that movement was consistent with one thing: being placed inside a vehicle and driven away. Then, in the final 10 to 15 minutes before contact was lost at 2:28 in the morning, came the finding that investigators have described as the most disturbing element of the entire pacemaker analysis. The natural beat-to-beat variation in Nancy's heart rate began to decrease in a pattern that has one clinical meaning. pharmacological sedation. Someone administered a drug to an 84-year-old woman with a chronic heart condition in the dark while carrying her out of her own home. You do not accidentally have medical-grade sedatives on your person. You research them. You acquire them. You bring them with intent, knowing exactly what medical conditions you are going to be dealing with when you walk through that door. At 2:28, the pacemaker signal stopped reaching the bedside monitoring unit. Not because Nancy's heart stopped, because the vehicle she was in had driven far enough from her home that the connection could no longer hold. At 2:28 in the morning on February 1st, 2026, Nancy Guthrie was alive. Her heart was beating. And everything her body experienced from that moment forward, every hour of every one of the more than 100 days she has now been missing, has been recorded inside that device in her chest, waiting. That is not a small detail. That is the center of this entire case. Now look at what the investigation did after Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos publicly stated in February of 2026 that the Guthrie family had been cleared. All siblings and spouses, he said. Savannah Guthrie cleared, Annie Guthrie cleared, Cameron Guthrie cleared. Tommaso Cioni, as a spouse, falls under that umbrella. What happened next did not match that statement. Federal agents returned to Annie and Tommaso's home more than 5 separate times after that public clearance. They left with items in brown paper bags, the kind law enforcement uses specifically to preserve biological evidence. Annie Guthrie's vehicle was towed and impounded. Their septic tank was physically examined. Security cameras were removed from the property. You do not examine a septic tank belonging to people you have genuinely moved past. The public statement and the investigative behavior told 2 completely different stories. And Dominic Evans, the one person most directly connected to the primary focus of that investigation, was never mentioned in that clearance statement. Not once. What this case required, according to investigators, was 2 things that almost never exist in the same person. The first was intimate insider knowledge. The home layout, the camera system, the gate, Nancy's daily routine, her medications, her daughter Savannah's travel schedule for the Winter Olympics, and the real financial picture underneath the public perception of television wealth. That kind of knowledge cannot be gathered from a parked car across the street. A stranger casing that property can learn when the lights go on and off. A stranger cannot learn that the Nest cameras are essentially decorative. A stranger cannot land on $6 million as the precise outer limit of what Savannah Guthrie could move quickly. That knowledge lives inside the family and inside people who have spent years sitting adjacent to it at dinner tables and in living rooms. The second thing this operation required was the documented physical willingness to enter a home at 1:47 in the morning, confront a conscious woman, control her, administer a sedative, and carry her out. Sheriff Nanos called Nancy a woman of great sound mind. She did not cooperate willingly. She had to be physically managed. She had to be carried, which means the person who took her had to support her full body weight through that house and out the front door. A man with documented burglary and robbery convictions has a paper record that speaks directly to that specific capability. One person provides the blueprint. The other walks through a gate that was left open for him, approaches a camera he has been told is not recording, moves through rooms he has been given the layout of in advance, and brings a sedative because he was told exactly what he would be dealing with when he got inside. A 19-year musical partnership, 2 people who have spent nearly 2 decades reading each other's timing on a stage without needing to speak, provides exactly the model of silent coordination that kind of operation requires. As of this recording, the genetic genealogy investigation is active. 2 DNA profiles from 2 unknown males sit in an FBI lab right now. Companies like Parabon Nanolabs, working with investigator Cece Moore, have broken cases where the suspect had no profile in any criminal database, using nothing more than a partial match with a distant relative, a second cousin, a third cousin, someone who submitted their DNA to Ancestry or 23andMe without ever thinking about what that submission might one day reveal. The Golden State Killer had no profile anywhere. Genetic genealogy found him anyway. Cell tower data from the Tucson area covering the night of January 31st and the morning of February 1st has been subpoenaed. Purchase records for Ozark Trail backpacks at Tucson area Walmart locations have been pulled. Cash purchases at Walmart are captured on store security cameras, and those cameras have footage retention policies. If that backpack was bought recently enough, that footage still exists somewhere. The FBI has not named Dominic Evans as a suspect. But the FBI also never publicly named Joseph D'Angelo as a suspect in the Golden State Killer investigation, until the day they arrested him in his driveway. Before we wrap up, there is one detail from this case that still does not sit right, and it has nothing to do with the forensics. Evans told the New York Times he met Nancy Guthrie exactly once, one Easter egg hunt in 2011, 15 years before she was taken. He is the 19-year bandmate of her son-in-law. 19 years of knowing about that family, that house, that life. And his entire claimed personal connection to Nancy Guthrie is one afternoon in a backyard 15 years ago. People make very specific and very minimal claims about their connection to a person when they have been carefully advised about what to say. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She has a pacemaker in her chest and medications she requires every single day to stay alive. Somewhere, that device is still counting her heartbeats. It has been counting since 2:28 in the morning on February 1st, and it has not stopped. Every second she has been missing is recorded inside it, waiting for the moment investigators can reach it. If you have any information related to this case, the FBI tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. The website is tips.fbi.gov. The reward is $50,000 from the FBI. Savannah Guthrie has added $1 million of her own money on top of that. Here is the question I keep coming back to, and I want to know if you feel the same way. If Nancy's own pacemaker recorded every moment of what happened to her that night, and that data is sitting in an FBI lab right now, what is it going to tell us when this case finally breaks open? Leave your thoughts below. And if this kind of careful, detailed coverage of cases that matter is something you want to keep seeing, subscribe. We are not going anywhere, and neither is this story.